Today I woke up, I saw the white out there, and like you can kind of tell, like through the shades, you're like, man, it just looks brighter for 6:45 in the morning. Um, and I was super thrilled. I woke up before Rachel, and I'm in the other room, and I hear her alarm go off, and like 30 seconds later, I hear this, yes, snow. Um, but it was super cool. I was with our some students earlier. We are going through a book right now, and so I was downtown campus, and I was driving out here, and I was just reminded. I was listening to the song called "So Will I," and it's a very, very powerful song, just reminding us to always be ready to worship the Lord. And there's this lyric, and I was a little rushed, so I was trying to, like maybe calm down a little bit. And I'm driving, and downtown, it's kind of dreary with the snow, but as you're driving out here towards Murphy, it's such a beautiful place. You just see the snow kind of falling on the ground. And there's this lyric, and it says, I can see your heart in everything you say, every painted sky and canvas of your grace. So I was just like, I was driving out. Sorry, I'm multitasking and I'm not very good at it. I was driving out and I was just reminded of that. Like, man, God painted this beautiful canvas. Anyways, just a reminder that it's just so amazing to see God's heart kind of painted on our valley in this land. And it was a good reminder. And I'm like, all right, God, like you totally got this. And that's what we're going to be talking about a little bit today. Is we're there. Sorry. Yeah. Really? Like nobody told me? Or you're like, oh, okay. Jason had my back, but my eyes were closed, I guess. So, okay. God's heart's cool. My mind is human. So we're talking about that today. We're in Exodus 4, and we're going to look at God's heart. And we are going to look at the side of God's heart where maybe, I don't know, me as a human, I'm not always the biggest fan of this process, but that's what we're going to look at, and we're using Exodus 4 today. So if you have your Bibles, flip like 12 pages from the front, and don't go too far. So we're looking at Exodus 4. We're looking at this life of Moses, and I am blown away by Moses' life. He made a mistake or two or 1,000, but I'm more amazed by what the Lord did in his life. We don't see the full work yet. We're only in Exodus 4. There's a lot of chapters to go. We don't see the full work yet, but here's a spoiler alert. If you haven't ever read the Bible, I apologize, but it's been around for a while, that the Lord uses Moses, this hodgepodge of a man, to do some really, really, really cool things. I'd even go ahead and say that they are amazing. And it got me thinking about the before and after of when God works in our life. And for every single one of us, the before and after means something different. You know, before Jesus, after Jesus, or maybe before it like really clicked in our lives, before we really kind of gave God all control and we stopped fighting him for it. For Moses, we are currently like just past the before part. We're kind of in the midst of the before of this gnarly process, I'd say, of transformation in Moses' life. Because we see a lot of mistakes and we're like, come on, Moses. But if you flash forward to the New Testament, you see that like God transforms him into like a Bible Hall of Famer. But right now, we know he's got murder under his belt. He's got doubt under his belt. And he's gotten into a few arguments with God already, and we're 4 chapters in. Not the best start. But in Hebrews 11, verses 24 to 28, we're not going to read them, but we see that Moses' picture is literally like hung up in the Bible Hall of Faith. So it got me thinking about this before and after process, because a lot of times we see the before, we see the after, but got me thinking about that hard work that is in the in-between process, the patience, the learning. And that's what we're going to look at today. But I do have like a few pictures, a few cool like before and after pictures that I want to go through. So I believe the first one I have is of a little orange grove. Does anybody know what this could possibly be the before of? Okay, well, I'll go ahead and tell you. Disneyland. Sorry, it's not the best quality. But Disneyland was just this vacant orange grove. And then the next picture I have is this old barn, and it didn't just magically appear, but after a lot of hard work and a lot of transformation, a lot of thinking, it turns into a beautiful home or some prettier barn. Now, hitting up science and biology for a minute, we all know that this next before is a little itty bitty caterpillar. And through an amazing transformation, we see it turn into a gnarly butterfly that's disgusting, thinking of holding it. I don't like creepy crawlies. So now trying to address our heartstrings, we see this little kid holding a baby, and it's very beautiful. And after a lot of hard work and God working this life, this turns into our pastor. Oh yeah, let's clap for that. So that's a little heartstring for you. But now we see the before, we see the after. The before, we're always kind of like, that's cool, you know? And the after, we're like, oh, or ah, or wow, or even we're trying to disbelieve it. But we don't always see the in-between process. We don't see the work that's put in. We don't see the transformation. Quite honestly, it can be ugly, like that in-between process. Like you think of the transformation from the caterpillar to the butterfly. If you were in on that process, it's not like you're sitting there going like, ooh, yeah, you're probably like, that's disgusting. I don't need that. Today we're going to look at this process as it's kind of already happening in Moses' life, but we really see this instance happen in Exodus 4. And obviously, I'd like us to apply this to our life, what it looks like in our life, the patience that's being created or that's being relied on, the faith that's happening, the discernment we need to have in this process. Oftentimes, though, on God's part, he's giving us a little bit of tough love. Tough love. That's our title today. I'm a big fan of just not tough love, like, hey, here's a cookie, hope you feel better, here's some rest, but oftentimes, this transformation in our lives is going to require a lot of tough love. So we're going to look at God's refinement in Moses' life, and we're using Exodus 4 as this roadmap. Currently, if you've been with us, you see Moses getting all Moses-y, right? He's using, if I'm not mistaken, excuses 3, 4, and 5 in this discussion with God and their conversation. In this, Moses shows an extreme lack of confidence in himself. There, he just is like, nope, I can't do it at all. Which then also reflects in this conversation his lack of faith that God, who is calling him to do these things, will have the ability to allow him to do these things. Or he has a lack of faith in God's ability to use Moses. Moses kind of starts off this conversation because God's like, hey, go ahead and talk to Pharaoh, like you are going to free and liberate the Israelites. And Moses is like, well, what if they don't believe me? You know, what if they, like, who am I to have this conversation? God drops a little hat trick of miracles on him. He says, drop your staff. It goes from a staff to a snake, back to a staff. That would have convinced me. I'm like, well, that was really cool. I would just like do it again just to see if it would happen again. And then God's like, hey, stick your hand in your bosom, pull it out, and his hand's all like flaky with what's thought to be like leprosy or some sort of skin disease. And he's like, ugh, and he puts it back, and it's healed. And again, I'm going through a lot of really cool things really quickly. And then God's like, by the way, backup plan, if they're not convinced, take some water from the Nile, it's going to turn into blood. So he equips him with these miracles. God loads him up with all these miracles. But then Moses has the audacity to be like, God, I'm not eloquent. Like, I'm not a good talker. Or, I'm not a good speaker. And so God responds to him, Exodus 4, verses 11 and 12, and he says this, who gave human beings their mouths? Who makes them deaf or mute? Who gives them sight or makes them blind? Is it not I, the Lord? Now go. I will help you speak and will teach you what to say. So God just totally throws this at him. It's not like he's wanting to engage in debate. It's like, hey, we know the answer. Now go, and I will teach you what to say. He says, like, Moses, was it not I that gave you the tools for your body? Was it me? Like, it was me. Clearly, I'm going to give you the skills then to operate. It's not like God gives him the tools and is like, well, what do I do now? God was prepared in equipping Moses. But then finally, Moses has nothing left in the tank. He's like, man, God shot down my 4 best excuses. And he's like, God, can you just send someone else? Just like, go with your plan B or your plan C. And I'm reading these first 12 verses, And I'm sitting here thinking, Moses, you punk. Not to quote Joe, he says, like, you little punk. Like, do you not understand? Because we get to see God kind of, in hindsight, God working through the Old Testament. We had Genesis to look at, and we're like, man, God is awesome. Like, Moses, what's your deal? But then I hit kind of the next verse, and I'm thinking to myself, man, Moses, you're 100% like me. Or I am like Moses. That is 100% me and my conversation with God. Moses, and here only has 5 excuses. I have at least 15 ready to go at all times when God puts something that's going to hit the hard button for me. But God, I can't. That's how, like, God, I can't do it. Like, you got the wrong guy. And then I try to get a little wiser. I'm like, God, I shouldn't. I shouldn't do this. It's not right. It won't work out well. And then I think, God, I won't. Like, yeah, sticking it to the man. I will not do this. I have no confidence in myself. Therefore, I have no confidence in you. But I think I try to justify it. That's what we do. We justify things. But God, like, they got it. You got somebody else out there better than me. Ask the more sufficient person to do that. Or go ask the other pastor, or go ask the pastor, go ask the church person to do that instead of me. Or go ask the person whose life is all together on Instagram. Like that person, like right here, that person. Ask that one because they will do it. So as we're kind of going through this refining process, we're going to dig into our notes and we're going to try and highlight what God is doing. And here I think there's 2 things I want to highlight that I think God is doing. And the first one is that God addresses our weaknesses. He does not avoid them or avoid it. If you only have one weakness, he does not avoid it. If you have multiple like myself, he does not avoid them. This passage stirred up several emotions in my heart as I was reading it. Not only did I find myself relating to Moses more and more and more, the before Moses, though, of course, the one that seems rather empty and borderline pathetic, I related with him a lot. But it also reminded me how inferior I am to the sovereignty of God. Because while God is sitting there trying to focus and address my weakness, I am trying really hard to avoid them. I have all right, I know my weaknesses. I'm really self-aware, so I'm going to do whatever I can to just not touch those. I think if I'm moving, so my buddies like Jason and Dane, if we're all helping somebody move and I see a really, really heavy box, right? I'm not going to go to that box. I'm going to go make myself busy with the flower vases. Hey, I got these. I got to, do something with them. I'm like, Jason, Dane, you take care of the heavy boxes. I'm going to avoid those because I am not the strongest person I've ever seen. But God loves us. He cares for us. He calls on us to serve him. So in that, he is going to refine us in our relationship, run us through the fire or the gauntlet, as some might call it. Oftentimes, I'm quick to be like, God, you're torturing me. You're holding the magnifying glass over the ant. But he's not doing it to torture us. He's doing it to teach us. An example of this in my life occurred around the age of 22. I got a job as the teen director at the Boys and Girls Club. I got to oversee teenagers in the after-school program. Only one problem. In no way, shape, or form was I equipped to handle teenagers, manage, direct, reprimand them. I was not equipped to do that. I sat there my first day and, hey, go ahead and do this. And they're like, no. I'm like, what? They talk back? What do I do now? That job, it tore me apart. It really did. I was borderline ready to quit. And I was talking with God. I'm like, God, I'm getting eaten alive out there. I totally thought you lined up my steps to get to this job. And now I'm being left out to dry. And he's like, hey, did I not put you there? Did I not equip you with your heart, with your brain, with your mouth? Did I not do that? And I'm like, okay, I know the answer there. He's like, now go out there and serve, and serve me while you're doing it. And, the Lord blessed it. I ended up growing in my skin. I found peace, and I found a love for that job that I had for several years. So God is not going to avoid our weaknesses. He's like, all right, you're good at this, you're bad at that, so I'm just never going to touch those. We're going to put those in that gray area, and we're just going to address your strengths. He provides us the opportunities, though, to address those sins as well. I'm reminded, if we're talking about weaknesses, we got to talk about 2 Corinthians 12, verse 9. It says, each time he said, my grace is all you need. My power works best in weakness. And the author says, now I am glad to boast about my weakness so that the power of Christ can work in me. Grace is all you need. Like, my power works best in your weakness. And so I'm reminded that, like, my weakness is a reminder of my dependence that I need on God in that weakness. Like, oh man, I can't do that. Yup, correct. But in your weakness, he is strong and he is mighty, and he is glorified when we address those weaknesses. So we see that in Moses' life, like he is just slinging these excuses at God, but God is just not fazed. He's not fazed by it. God, I'm not eloquent. I don't talk good. But God pulls a quick one. He's conversing with Moses. He's like, hey, what if I brought your brother Aaron into the mix? Plot twist, he's already on his way. So regardless of what Moses is going to say, so he brings his brother that says, all right, now you talk to your brother who is more eloquent than you now can talk to the people. I talk to you, you talk to him, he talks to the people. So not only is God working in our weakness, but he is addressing that on all sides as well. Oftentimes, he is setting things up before we even realize it. Like, oh, I can acknowledge this is my weakness. And like, God, it's like, cool, glad you finally caught up. Like, I've been working on this for quite some time. So when we want to throw in the flag, God's already at work. And the why he is doing this is also incredibly exciting. I was thinking about it, like, his work is being done in us so that we can do his work through him. So it's kind of this nice, cool circle that his work is being done in us so that we can do his work through him. He is building up his soldiers, he's building up his children to serve him. But oftentimes, this tough grind feels a lot like the dentist. I'm in the season of my life where I didn't go to the dentist for a while, and now I am, and it's like, oh, surprise, you have cavities. And I'm like, oh, bummer, I was hoping they wouldn't. So I went to the dentist, and he's like, you have cavities. Now, I can avoid those cavities all day. I can not pick up the phone when that number that says dentist calls me. I can just avoid it, but guess what doesn't go away? The cavity. The cavity is just not going to go away because I will it to. It needs to be addressed, and it needs to be worked on. And that sets the stage for our second point, and this is a tough one for me, but number 2 is that God addresses our sin. He doesn't excuse it. God addresses our sin. He doesn't excuse it. So Moses, after this conversation with God like finally said, it seems like they agreed that Moses was going to go ahead and follow through with God's plan. And he goes back to Midian where he was to take care of a little housekeeping, tie up some loose ends, talk to his father-in-law before he goes and addresses the Egyptians. We're given a pretty odd excerpt here, but we're going to read it in Exodus 4, verses 24 through 26. On the way to Egypt, at a place where Moses and his family had stopped for the night, the Lord had confronted him and was about to kill him. Verse 25, but Moses' wife Zipporah took a flint knife and circumcised her son. She touched his feet with the foreskin and said, now you are a bridegroom of blood to me. When she said a bridegroom of blood, she was referring to the circumcision. After that, the Lord left him alone. You ever read something and you're like, man, I don't think I got the full story here. Like, there has to be more. Like, they were just talking, and now God is confronting him and about to kill him. So a little background in Genesis chapter 17, verses 9 and 10. Highlight a conversation between God and Abraham, where God instructs Abraham that the Israelites were to obey their terms of the covenant. Circumcision was the sign of this covenant, evidence of the parents' faith in the promise of God. So as a testament of the parents' faith and God's covenant promise, every male was to be circumcised. So what we're gathering here is that Moses' son had apparently not been circumcised yet. So what's really interesting is that Moses is getting prepped to lead the charge against Pharaoh. He is getting ready to liberate God's people. Yet he's living in disobedience and sin by not circumcising his son when he should have. There's thoughts that his son at this age was probably quite old, Moses being a little later in his years. So through this encounter with the quick thinking and the help of his wife, the circumcision happens, thus seemingly satisfying the Lord. And again, I can find myself in a way relating to Moses. Like, how many times have I been in a leadership position, leading a Bible study or sharing something or a small group? And I'm encouraging these younger people that are looking up to me and, hey, read your Bible. Hey, stop your sin. I don't say it like that blatantly because that never works. But I'm like, stop sinning. Read the Bible. Yet, in my own personal life, there's this secret sin that no one knows about. Meanwhile, my Bible's over here just collecting dust. Very hypocritical of me. So the second point, again, it's tough to read, but like that visit to the dentist, I'm very thankful for it as you begin to see the fruit that God addresses our sin, and he just doesn't excuse it. Today in culture, more than ever, I think we're in this society that seems to be okay with excusing people's sin. Oftentimes, it's not even regarded as sin. It's actually regarded as pleasure or joy or something you deserve. And our excuses, because we're good at that, that's not for me to address that. Oh, well, it doesn't affect me. Like you do you, just don't let it affect me. Like, here's my bubble. Do whatever you want outside of it. It's my problem when you enter my bubble. Yet, for me as a believer, sometimes in my flesh, out of the other side of my mouth, I actually find myself using other people's sin to excuse my sin. So I'm like, oh, they're doing that. All right, well, that's obviously like a level 5 sin. I'm at like a level 2.5, so I'm really fine because God's got to talk to them before he talks to me. Like, how wacky is that? Just for like, how wild is that sometimes that's a process? I mean, I don't know if I'm the only one. If so, that's embarrassing. But that we do that. We're like, oh, that's not my problem, but I'm going to try and benefit from their sin. I, for one, am so thankful for a God whose love for us is so passionate that he desires to refine us and keep us accountable in our obedience to him. And also that he has put people in my life that are willing to have that same love for me, that they don't excuse my sin as well. He calls us to act out his will and his mission in our lives. And any sin is going to deter us from that. More often than not, sin starts out as something small, but will cancerously develop in our lives, pointing towards us, not towards God. So it's going to derail us. And a side note, I think for our sake as humans, and I think this is this is something that's been in my head, not to have us on opposite ends of God, but expose your sin before God does. It's kind of something that's been in my heart. Like, the conviction is going to be in my heart, and I would much rather me have the strength to kind of confess that to the people in my lives and confess that to God before he's going to kind of expose that in our lives, because generally that's the one that breaks us even harder. In Ephesians 5:3, God's very clear when he speaks against sin. This is something that was shared to our students this week. It says, "But among you there must not even be even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity or of greed, because these are improper for God's holy people." Not even a hint of sexual immorality or any kind of impurity. So again, with sin being the selfish pursuit of our desires, we can't let that sidetrack us or get in the way of God's mission. All our attention needs to be on God. We cannot follow him half-heartedly, because that is going to then lead us into a pretty dangerous situation. I think of driving 100% of your attention on the road, but what happens when you start giving up that attention to other things? Things can happen that are very dangerous. God needed the sin out of Moses' life, which is what he addressed in Exodus. So God's continuing to develop us, create leaders for his church, but I want to address what our response is. As God works in our heart, he's addressing our weakness, he's addressing our sin. What is our response to this? So 3 things I'm going to look at just rather quickly. Our response first is an upward connection. Upward connection. Although I don't necessarily applaud his attitude or his method of action, I've always been intrigued by the relationship of God and Jonah. As you know, Jonah's the dude that got gulped by the big fish or the whale, depending on where you're at with that. So God calls on Jonah to bring a message to the people of Nineveh right out of the gate. Jonah 1:1 and 2. The Lord gave this message to Jonah. Get up and go to the great city of Nineveh. Announce my judgment against it because I have seen how wicked the people are. But Jonah flees, like he goes the other direction, which is something we all do, but I think the reason Jonah did it is unique. So after a storm, after a whale, Jonah finally gets it and he goes and delivers this message to the people of Nineveh. God sees their heart and he sees their desire to change and he grants mercy on them. And Jonah's response to God is classic. This is proof that Jonah truly knew God's heart. He says, "Didn't I say before I left home that you would do this, Lord? This is why I ran away to Tarshish. I knew that you are a merciful and compassionate God, slow to anger and filled with unfailing love." So Jonah's like, those people deserve to get destroyed, but I knew that if you're going to send me to tell them that you were going to have mercy on their heart because you're a compassionate God. And I personally wanted them to get destroyed. Jonah was fully connected with God in his heart, enough to know when his own personal desires conflict with those of God. So as we acknowledge and see God working in our lives through our weakness and our sin, and we address that and we kind of open up the doors to that, we are going to find that we are more connected with him. The more time we intentionally spend with him, we know his heart more and more. Much like any relationship with a person. If I'm with somebody every day, I'm going to know their heart. I'm going to know their tendencies. But if I see them once a year on Christmas or Easter, I'm going to be rather unfamiliar with them. So as we allow the Lord to kind of work on our relationship and our heart in our relationship, that upward connection will then lead to number 2, the inward growth. And that's kind of the story of me working at the Boys and Girls Club. That was totally something that happened. I was like, "Oh, God, I see what you're doing." And he allowed this process to happen inside of me. As we continue to grow closer to God, as we abide in him, then we will begin not only grow in his love, but we will then start to imitate him in our lives. This is kind of cool. It's where this transformation, it's kind of where it goes from God addressing my sin and weaknesses. It now transforms to God and me addressing those weaknesses and sin together. And then this inward growth and that process will only continue to grow as we continue to walk with the Lord. It's not like this point where we have reached it where it's like, boom, inward growth commences, and then we just kind of let it go on autopilot. It's a continual process, much like working out or eating healthy. Once you start them, that's really cool. You see the work, but then once you stop, it's not like you're going to continue to get stronger. You have to keep working on it. 3 quick reminders of inward growth, though, that it's going to be tough. It's like a refining process. You think of metal going through fire at incredibly hot temperatures. It's a refining process. It's going to be tough. It's going to be worth it. God working in your life will be worth it. It's not like you'll get to the end result and be like, all right, well, that was lame. I'm not doing that again. No, it will be worth it. And number 3, it will be impactful to you and to those around us. And that leads to kind of our third and final part here is that the upward connection, the inward growth, then leads to outward going. And then just a reminder, if you have your notes, you might be like, that looks familiar. Our big thing here at River Valley is connect, grow, go. And just that idea that we are connecting, we are growing, and we are going. And we see that happen in Moses' life. And I think this is where that process happens. And then what we're going to see from here on out is the going aspect of Moses. Keep in mind, he is still learning, like we all are. But the Lord continues to reveal his love and his mission to Moses. And the faith in the Lord, as Moses sees God work more in his life, his faith in God continues to grow. God is building, God is refining, and God is developing Moses before our very eyes in this chapter, and it's very cool. And it provides him the opportunity and the strength then to go out and talk to Pharaoh. So what I kind of want to look at is that going piece in our lives. And we have this really cool opportunity. I know there's a lot of people here that are serving in a lot of different ministries, and that's really cool. But there's one other ministry that I would like to kind of, it's going to get addressed here. And so we have this video, and then we're going to hear a little bit more from Josh about that ministry.
If a natural disaster struck our area and thousands of children were left alone or scared, a state of emergency would ensue. we'd all rush to the front lines, taking children in, bringing supplies, searching for survivors. The foster care system in our state faces a similar disaster. In the last year, more than 11,000 Oregon children were in foster care. Each week, children are split from their siblings or bounced from one home to another because of the lack of foster homes. God's heart is for the vulnerable. In our city, His people are responding in massive ways to come alongside children and families served by our state's Department of Human Services. This is a movement of churches adopting their local child welfare offices, helping in small ways, from staff appreciation lunches to building welcome boxes, donating bunk beds, volunteering time to entertain children as they enter foster care, and becoming foster families at a record rate. Love, compassion, and hospitality are coming around DHS, but the crisis continues. We are asking you to join this movement of the church, to respond, to radically love children in foster care, and to overwhelm our state's child welfare system with hospitality from the outside in. It's time to act. It's time to change the way we care for every child in Oregon.